have been spending time on Sunday nights in Matthew's Gospel. If you want to go there with me tonight, I want to take a reading. This happens a lot to me. I've told you about this, and this week was no different. I go and I'm starting to study this next passage, and I'm thinking I'm going to have to go a longer chunk because there's not going to be enough that I'm seeing there to talk about. And I start digging in, and I start thinking, okay, I could turn this small passage into like 3 messages. So I'm just going to try to have one reasonable length message tonight. Don't worry about that. That wasn't what it was about. But the point is that there's so much when you really start digging in and seeing these things. And I'm so grateful. It just always reminds me. I love it when it's fresh. This is the infinite, inexhaustible Word of God. It's what He spoke. And so we shouldn't expect it to be any other way than like Him, which is perfect. And we can never get to the bottom of everything. But there is so much we can gain from what He gives us. And so we want to read here in Matthew chapter 8, verses 18 through 22. If you'd like to read along with me, it says, "Now when Jesus saw great multitudes about Him, He gave commandment to depart unto the other side. And a certain scribe came and said unto Him, Master, I will follow thee whithersoever thou goest. And Jesus saith unto him, The foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man hath not where, or nowhere, to lay his head. And another of his disciples said unto him, Lord, suffer me first to go and bury my father. But Jesus said unto him, Follow me, and let the dead bury their dead." So let's set the stage to understand what's going on here, because Jesus has finished in Matthew 7, the Sermon on the Mount, and what we've seen so far have been Him healing the man who was a leper. He healed the centurion's servant. He came to Peter's house and healed Peter's mother-in-law. And then people came over that night because it was the Sabbath. And after the sun went down, they came. And Jesus was healing everybody who came to Peter's house. And so that had been going on. And this was now in the city of Capernaum. And they were, this is a lakeside town. They were fishermen. And they were on the Sea of Galilee. And so as they're at this location, Jesus, because of all the press of the people that were coming there and were wanting to be healed, Jesus says to His disciples, let's go to the other side. So He tells His disciples to go, and He gave them commandment. He gave commandment, an order, a charge in verse 18, to go to the other side, from the northwest side of the Sea of Galilee toward the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. And why? The reason why is because there was a press of the crowd, and He wanted to go elsewhere. Who did He tell to go? Well, He told His disciples. And one thing that's important when we read Matthew, we need to understand the way Matthew uses the word disciples doesn't just mean the 12 apostles. He uses the term more broadly. In fact, one of the things that I learned, and I don't know, maybe this is obvious as you read this, but I never really got this until I was digging in. These two men had been told to go with Jesus. And what we read about in verses 19 through 22 is how they responded to Jesus saying, go to the other side with me. You say, well, how do you know that these men were included in this? Well, the first man, he's called a certain scribe. A certain scribe, and he calls Jesus master. So this man was a master of the law. He understood those things. He was educated. He called Jesus master, and we see he says something in verse 19, and Jesus responds. And then notice verse 21. It says, and another of his disciples said unto him, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. So another disciple. Notice that. Another disciple, meaning that first man was also a disciple who had been told to go with Jesus to the other side. That's why the second, so they're both giving a response to the call to go to the other side. The first is very willing to go. The second one makes an excuse, okay? And both of these men were disciples who were under this command to go. And, well, what is on the other side? Tosh Farms. That's what's on the other side. Pig farmers. Pig farmers. Where they go on the other side is where the Gadarenes are at. We're going to get to there eventually. Remember, Jesus cast out the man who had a legion of demons in him, and where did those demons go? Into pigs. And the pigs ran off a cliff. Who raises pigs? Pig farmers. You know many Jewish pig farmers? No. This other area across the lake was not all Jewish people. There were some Jews over there, but this area on the other side was neither Galilee, where they were at on that western side, nor was it like Judea, where Jerusalem was at. This is almost kind of like a foreign mission. Okay? So you kind of have to understand what's going on in their minds when Jesus says, we're going to get in the boat, disciples, and we're going to go to the other side. This other side is not home. It's not among their people, so to speak, over there. Although there were some Jews on that side, it's not like it was where they were at in Galilee, not like it was down in Judea, okay? So this would be kind of a foreign mission. And Jesus says, let's come to the other side. And so we see a couple things going on. Out of all the people that's over there on this northwest side. Out of all those people there, Jesus is talking to a subset of them and calling them disciples and saying, come with me. And so we see kind of a first initial screening. He's talking to disciples. But then Jesus uses like another screen to start sifting a little bit of these disciples who he's told to go. And so we're going to focus in on what's going on there, what Jesus says, and the response back and forth between these two men. What I want to tell you about before we dig into this passage is an experience that Mary and I had. Maybe I've shared this with you all. I don't know. We went many, many, many years ago to Cancun, and this is why I have no desire to go back to Cancun. We went there, got an inexpensive trip. We thought, hey, we'll get out of Alaska, go down there, enjoy some time. And because we got an inexpensive trip, we were staying in a place where we were being constantly bombarded up to go to timeshare presentations. And we were good. When we were on the street, they were trying to hit us up all the time, and we said no. But when we got back to our hotel, we thought we were in a safe place. We were not in a safe place at our hotel because there was somebody down in the lobby one day, very nicely dressed, and we thought they were just hotel staff and said, hey, you want to come over here? We'll give you a free breakfast, and we're going to take you on a little trip off to this island, which we won't even talk about what happened with that, and get away, and, you can snorkel and all this stuff, and you just got to go and hear a little presentation. And so we had been saying no. And so we finally agreed. Okay, we'll go do this, and these people seem nice. It's at our hotel. Well, of course, we go get it in the van, and we go off to this place, and the guy is telling us, and showing us these properties, which was all very nice, of course. That's what they're going to show you is the nice stuff. And then, and we go through all that, and we enjoy our breakfast, and we talk to him, and I'm asking some questions, and he's a little bit evasive, but, I'm not too worried at this point. Then they bring us into the hard sell room. Okay, the room they got all the other couples that they got to go to breakfast sitting at the tables around there, and every time somebody says yes, they ring the bell and all that stuff. And he starts talking to us about all this and how much money it's going to save us. And he starts kind of going through all the different charges, and he just kind of like jumps over some stuff and that there's an initial fee and and this is only how much it costs a month. And I'm like, well, how much is that initial fee? And it's only going to be this much a month. I'm like, well, what about the initial fee? You mentioned an initial fee. It says something about it. Well, what you need to see, though, is it only costs this much a month. And I'm just like, look, I don't feel like I'm getting the whole picture here. And so he finally said, okay, well, let my boss come and talk to you, okay? So this was the hard sell guy. And he comes, and he starts trying to do the same thing, telling me, this is only going to cost you so much a month. And I said, look, you said there is an initial fee. How much is the initial fee? He said, $40,000. How quickly can you get us $40,000? And I said, I cannot get you $40,000. That's not going to happen. I don't have that. It's not going to happen. Well, okay, he finally realized he wasn't going to get it out of us, and so he was trying to sell us on, vacation tickets and stuff, or coupons and stuff. And anyway, we didn't buy anything, and then they didn't give us a taxi back to our hotel. We had to walk in the hot Cancun sun, and that whole thing, that the beach they took you to, well, you had to pay to rent a lawn chair at it once they got you over there, and it was horrible. So anyway, they were playing hide the ball, right? They were playing hide the ball. Jesus has no interest in playing hide the ball with people. Jesus Christ is very upfront and honest with people when he is giving them a command and calling them to go with him and to follow him. He is very honest and real about what he is expecting and what the cost is going to be. And that's exactly what we see in this passage. Jesus being very open and honest, transparent with these two men. The first man that Jesus speaks to here in verses 19 through 20, he's called a certain scribe. Okay, so he was an educated man. He said to Jesus, "Master, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus, I'm willing to go any place. You said to go to the other side of Galilee. Wherever you say to go, Lord, I'm going to go. And Jesus said to him, "Look, foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has not a place to lay his head." And this is no exaggeration, because the next night we will find Jesus Christ sleeping in a boat. Okay? That's the next thing we're going to come to. This is not an exaggeration. He will be sleeping in the bottom of a boat in this next passage in verses 23 through 27. Okay? So this is real. What he's telling this man is not an exaggeration. It is a fact. What we see is that what Jesus is telling this man is a command. He commanded this man to come with him. It was not a suggestion. And this man calls Jesus teacher. He calls him teacher. None of the disciples throughout the New Testament ever called Jesus teacher, save one. Judas Iscariot called him an Aramaic form of the word teacher, which is rabbi. But otherwise, no one else called him teacher. And what that tells us is that this man thought of Jesus the same way he thought of other Jewish teachers. And the way it typically works with these other Jewish teachers is you would pick who you'd want to learn from, and you would go to them and you'd say, "I'd like to be your student. I'd like you to teach me. I'll make myself available at this time, and you can teach me." Well, what Jesus is trying to explain to this man, starting to lay the foundation of, is, look, I'm not like your other Jewish teachers. This is not a suggestion. You're not going to come to me on your terms. You will come to me on my terms. In fact, he will later tell his disciples, he says, "Look, you have not chosen me. I have chosen you. And I have ordained you. I've set you apart that you would go and bring forth fruit. And that your fruit would remain. That whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he may give you." You see, we, in this whole process of following Jesus, coming to Jesus, getting saved, we are never the initiators in this. Amen. He is the one who has sought us out. He is the one who has pursued us and come after us. He is the one who sent his Spirit to work in our heart, to open our eyes to the gospel, to bring us to that place we could have faith. And even after that, it's his Spirit working in our heart saying, "Come after me. Here is what I want you to do." Okay? Not on our terms. This is going to be on his terms. And this man, as Jesus was saying, "Go to the other side," his initial response was, "Let's go. I'll go anywhere." He was very excited. He was willing to make this verbal commitment, all-inclusive commitment. And I'll tell you, with all that Jesus had been doing, Jesus had been teaching an amazing way, and he had been healing people and all this stuff, and this guy is seeing this, and he's like, "I'll just go any place, Jesus." Jesus sees past that initial excitement, because it's not uncommon for people to boldly profess an allegiance that isn't backed by understanding of the commitment they're really making. This is not uncommon, and we even see it today, right? You know, in the Old Testament, when the Jewish people were around Mount Sinai and Moses came down with the law, and they said, he said, will you be willing to make this covenant and commitment with God? And they said, yes, everything he said, we'll do. We'll make this covenant with God. We see the smoke, we see the fire, we hear the thunder, all the things. Yes, 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 we'll follow God. Well, what did he find them doing when he came back down the mountain many days later, right? Breaking the first commandments. They had this initial, we'll do it all. And they couldn't do any of it. Same thing, as Joshua led the same people generations later into the promised land. And he says, choose you this day whom you're going to serve, right? They're like, oh, yes, we're going to serve the Lord. We're going to choose to serve him. And if you keep reading the passage, Joshua's like, you're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to do it. You don't really have the heart to do it. But they were willing to make that commitment. Peter did the same thing, telling Jesus, look, I will follow you to death. I will go with you. I will die with you. And Jesus says, you're going to deny me 3 times tonight, Peter. He saw what was really going on in the heart. John Mark took off with Paul and Barnabas on that first mission trip and didn't make it past the island of Crete before he turned around and headed back, even though he had made the initial commitment to go with them on that missionary journey. That became a point of contention later between Paul and Barnabas when Barnabas wanted to take him on the second one, right? And so it is not unusual for people to get excited when you see God working and things happening and saying, I am going to be with him all the way. And what Jesus is not wanting us to do is to come for the breakfast and see the properties and say, yeah, sign me up. And Jesus is saying, look, there is an initial fee. I want you to understand what it is right now. I'm not going to hide this from you. You need to understand, scribe, that foxes have a place to live. Even birds have nests. But I do not have a promise of a place where I'm going to lay my head tonight. You need to understand what it means to follow me. What does it mean to be homeless? What does it mean to be homeless? It means like on any given day. Let me just ask this question. What are you all doing after this? Probably going home. Maybe you're going to go to Sonic and then you're going to go home. Something like that, right? And how many of you have enough money in your pockets or in your account that you can go and get that thing to eat, right? And you got a place and you got a pillow and you got a door and you got a lock and you're not giving that a second thought. You're not, as you're sitting here tonight, you may be thinking about all sorts of different things, but you're not worried tonight about where you're going to lay your head. You got that all sorted out. And so you have the ability, because that's kind of taken care of, you have the ability to kind of sit here and try to be present in the moment. But what if you didn't have that place figured out where you're going to spend the night? What if you didn't know? What if you didn't have the resources to go buy a hotel room, right? Motel this way, hotel that way, right? What if? What would you be sitting here thinking about? It's like, okay, when's it going to get done? And I got to figure out where I'm going to stay. Maybe I can talk to them and they'll let me stay in the gym. You're probably going to be thinking about things like that all the time. If you don't have a place, you don't know where, under what conditions you're going to spend the night. You don't have a place to store your provisions, your food, or your possessions. It's a lot harder to build and maintain family and enduring relationships when you don't have a home and you are going from place to place. It introduces this significant degree of uncertainty into life about your security, about how you're going to keep going. This week we were visited by this Walking Across America couple, Torrin and Paige, and they were with us on Wednesday night. They called Wednesday morning here at the church, and I answered the phone, and they said, we're walking across America, and we're going to be passing through, walking from McKenzie to Huntington. And is it possible you would let us park on your church property? To not park, but camp. They're pushing carts. They're literally pushing carts, them and their dog. And they don't They get by what people give them, and they stay where they can. And they have their reasons for doing this, and I'm not behind all the reasons they're doing what they're doing, but this is something that we've just seen. And talking to them a little bit, especially Paige would open up a bit about just, the stress of, as they're walking, where are we going to stop? She's like, some places are okay with you camping, and some cities are like, or towns are like, move on through. We don't want you here. And so we have to just keep walking and not sure where we can set up. Some places will invite you to sleep on the court square. Other places are like, you can't stay any place until you get past our limits. And so that's going on. That's what they're kind of living with day by day. And what's Jesus' point in all this? He's basically saying, look, you need to understand the cost of discipleship. It is impossible to truly follow Jesus without a cost to our comfort or convenience. You will not truly be able to follow Christ and do what He's calling you to do without having to sacrifice some comfort or convenience. And He's not saying we all have to be homeless, okay? To do what He told them to do, they would have to do that. To do what He said He was willing to do, Jesus said, you need to understand what that means. But Jesus is explaining that there has got to be a cost to this. There is going to be a cost, and the cost is going to depend upon what He specifically calls you to do. And that can be hard. In our case early on, it was God telling us to go to Alaska and give up the jobs we had right out of college, which were good jobs. I worked at Rolls-Royce. I was a design engineer. I was working on jet engines. You talk about if you're a mechanical engineer and a cool job. It was working on designing jet engines and getting to put them in the test cells and do all those cool things. And I loved it. And you go up to Alaska where there's nothing like that. And that was scary. And then I thought I had a job, and I quit my job at Rolls-Royce. And then that afternoon after I quit my job at Rolls-Royce, they called and said, no, we're not going to hire you. So we moved up to Alaska, and I didn't have a job. My wife did, fortunately. I was able to get a job at Walmart, and we moved up, and God provided, and He was working the whole thing the whole time. But we never lacked a place to stay. We always had people willing to take us in there until we got our own place, and God was providing that, so we're not in the situation of not having a hole or a nest. But certainly there are times when God calls you to do something that you're going to have to give up something. And you got to be willing to do it if you're going to go where He tells you to go. The second man was not so excited. He was not so excited to follow Jesus. In fact, he offered Jesus what he believed would be a good excuse. He says to Jesus, another of His disciples said to Him, Lord, suffer me or allow me first to go and bury my father. But Jesus said unto him, follow me, and let the dead bury their dead. Now, that sounds very heartless, and I want you to understand what I believe Jesus is saying. So, in the Jewish society, when somebody died, they buried them within 24 hours. They were very quick about it. They might have a week of different ceremonies and stuff that they did, but burial was within a day. I don't believe that this man's father had already died. Because if his dad had just died and he was within 24 hours of his dad's death, what is he doing even here right now at this moment talking to Jesus? This is an idiom for these Jewish people. And by idiom is like raining cats and dogs or I saw the light. Idioms are things that you can't just look at the words and determine what it means. You have to understand what the reference is, right? Because we know it's literally not falling cats and dogs. We just know it means it's raining really hard. And burying my father in this sense, the idiom is like, my father is getting up in age and I need to stay and care for him until he dies and bury him, and then I will be willing to go. But until then, I've got this undetermined period of time until he dies that I need to make sure he's taken care of. And then, Jesus, I will do what you ask me to do. So he's not asking for a few hours. He's asking for likely what could be years. And we have to ask the question as we understand that, do we do that to Jesus at times when he's calling us or asking of us and saying, well, I will do that when my kids are grown, or when I retire, or when this, or when that, and then I'll get to what you're asking me to do. We need to understand that Jesus and the whole Bible from Old Testament to New Testament teaches us that taking care of your family is honorable. In fact, it's one of the 10 commandments. Honor thy father and thy mother. That is a good thing to do, and it's not just when you're little. It's also a calling that we have when we're older. In fact, Jesus is the very one who got on the Pharisees because they had this practice, this extra biblical practice called korban. It was a way that they could say, well, I've got plenty of money in the bank to take care of my mom and dad, but I'm going to basically kind of put it in a trust for the temple when I die. And so, I'm going to give my money when I die, not until then. I'm going to hold on to it and use it how I want to until then. But when I die, my money's going to go to the temple. So when mom and dad are old and sick and can't take care of themselves, well, I'm sorry, mom and dad, I can't spend any money on you because I'm going to give this to the temple when I die. They called that practice korban. And Jesus is the one who said to them, you all are invalidating the word of God for your foolish traditions. You should take care of your parents and not just hoard that money and say you're going to give it to the temple when you're dead. So Jesus called those people called them out for not taking care of their parents. Jesus is the one who was on the cross handing off responsibility for his mother Mary to the disciple John. Paul wrote, if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he is denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. So let's understand the Bible is very clear and it's very consistent from Old Testament to New Testament that caring for our family is honorable. So what do we make of what Jesus says? There's no explaining this away. There's no way to try to soften the blow of what Jesus says. Jesus will elsewhere say things like, if anyone comes to me and doesn't hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yea, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. There's no need to candy coat this. This is the priority of obedience to Jesus Christ. Jesus is saying what I call you to do has to be first. What I call you to do has to be first. Jesus was not saying that his parents need to die uncared for. He said, let the dead bury the dead. There are spiritually dead people, other family members at that point, who can take care of that responsibility. I'm calling you to go do this. This is what I'm asking you to do. We need to recognize when the Lord calls us to something, it becomes the thing we have to do. It has to take the highest priority. And I know that that's hard to hear. I understand that. I mean, I've lived that. And I've seen the hardships of it and the difficulties of it and the things, I had to miss my grandfather's funeral because we were living in Alaska and Mary was pregnant with Grace. And he was one of my best friends. And I couldn't go to his funeral because I had to be there and she was at the end of the pregnancy. And because I lived in Alaska. If we lived in Indiana still, it wouldn't have been a problem. And I know Mary wasn't able to be with her mom in the last days of her life because we were living in Alaska. And not in Indiana. And so that phone calls had to suffice until the end. Those are hard things, but you have to ask this question. How far would the gospel go? How far would the gospel have gone if nobody took that seriously? How far would the gospel go if nobody took this command seriously, that when Jesus says, I need to go and I need to do, that you do it? That it really does take priority and you have to trust him. You have to trust him to take care of those things that you cannot take care of yourself when you follow after him. In Mark 10, Peter said to Jesus, "Lo, we have left everything and have followed thee." Mark 10, 28 through 30. "We've left everything, Jesus, and followed you." And Jesus answered and said, "Verily I say unto you, there is no man that has left house or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or lands for my sake and the gospel's, but he shall receive 100-fold now in this time, houses and brothers and sisters and mothers and children and lands, with persecutions, and in the world to come, eternal life." The Lord is saying, yes, there are times I will call you to move away or to make what I've called you to do specifically a higher priority than other things that are good things to do. But you're going to receive 100-fold whatever you give up. Not just in the sweet by and by, but in the here and now. And I tell you, I believe it. I mean, I've seen it. I mean, we lived there in Alaska 22 years, and sometimes the hard thing is not to go. The hard thing is to stay. And then God does tell us to go, and that can be kind of hard. But I'll tell you, we came here and we see all the things that God has done, and we see all the love that exists in this place, and we see that God has saved our 2 sons. They're up there hearing Dad preach for their entire life, and then you come here, and then God just moves, right? And the love and the family that we have here in this place, and the blessings, and just the encouragement that we can all mutually give each other. My friend, you will never, ever, ever, ever outgive God. Ever. And so with these callings that God gives, the Lord gives us, there's a cost, right? It's going to cost us something to follow him. And it's going to have to rearrange the priorities of our life at times. But when we are truly following him and not ourselves, the blessings will be beyond anything you've given up. I want to close tonight with a song that I think is just the perfect song. I'm doing what you should never do, which is try to sing after you preach. So it's going to be even rougher than usual. But Brother Bruce Adamson, my pastor back growing up, used to sing this song, and I have no idea who wrote this. Maybe you're all going to be like, oh, we know that song. If you do, tell me who wrote it, because I'm curious. I tried to look it up beforehand to just say who it was, and I don't know. Couldn't find it. But the song is called Take Up Your Cross. Very much so. The song is called Take Up Your Cross. And what I love about this song is that it has both elements of this message in it. We have Jesus calling someone to go do something, and they're struggling with being willing to do it. But when they finally come to the place where they're willing, Jesus is very honest with them about the cost of this journey. And so I thought it just really went along with this this message tonight. So we'll try to finish with this. He said, take up your cross. But I said no. He said, there's work to do. I wouldn't go. He said the harvest fields are white, the laborers few, it it's almost night. So will you glean while it's still light? But I said no. He said, stand in the gap. I said no. My freedom is at stake. I wouldn't go. Sharper than a two-edged sword, severing by his holy word. My wayward child, obey the Lord. But I said no. Because my stubborn ways my Father sees. He broke my heart and brought me to my knees. I saw my loved ones all around, following me on trodden ground. And so I took my cross in hand, said I'll go. He said the way is long. I said I know. He said there'll be no song. I said I know. He said, my child, I'll stand by you, and step by step I'll lead you. Greater things if you'll be true. And it was so. So I took my cross in hand